So on a cultural subject, I had a really interesting experience over the last couple of weeks. A few years back, it's been years, Shapiro recommended that I see the HBO series Band of Brothers about Easy Company, an American Army company that was in D-Day and in the Battle of the Bulge. Very interesting, exciting war story from a book by Stephen Ambrose, an excellent historian. This was put together by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. And it just took me a long time to get to it. There's so much new content I wanted to look at, and I missed it the first time it came out. I had thought I was in England, but it actually came out in 2001 after I'd come back, but I'd just come back and I just didn't pick it up. And I was watching it, and here's the reason it was fascinating to me. One of the reasons my Hollywood career came to an end, maybe the central reason my Hollywood came to an end, was because of my vociferous, loud attack on Hollywood for making anti-war movies while our soldiers were in the field. Didn't bother me that people were anti-war. Didn't bother me that they thought, the Afghanistan war was wrong or the Iraq war was wrong. All of those things are your American right to make those decisions, very important decisions that citizens have to make. But never before had the American movie industry made movies depicting our soldiers in a bad way while our soldiers were in the field. If you go back and look at all of the movies against Vietnam, they all came out after the war was over. So I started to look at this and I started to yell about it. And finally, I wrote a big survey of old Hollywood movies called The Lost Art of War for City Journal. And here is how it began. This was after all these anti-war movies were coming out. I said, Hollywood has gone back to war, and this time it's appalling. All autumn long, the film industry released movies about America's battle against global jihad, with one exception, The Competent Actioner of the Kingdom. Each of these movies distorted an urgent, ongoing historical enterprise through the lens of a filmmaker's unthinking leftism. Redacted, Rendition, In the Valley of Elah, and Lions for Lambs characterize our soldiers and government agents as rapists, madmen, murderers, torturers of the innocent, or simply victims caught up in a venal and bloodthirsty American foreign policy. All this at the very moment when our real-life soldiers and agents are risking and sometimes losing their lives fighting the most hateful and cancerous worldview since Nazism, by which I meant radical Islam. So you wonder why my phone stopped ringing. I was selling a lot of scripts. I was making a lot of money. Suddenly my phone stopped ringing. And while I was watching these movies, one of them, I believe it was the movie They Were Expendable, which had John Wayne in it, but it was also directed by John Ford, and Robert Montgomery was in it, and a lot of the actors in it had been in World War II, so that in the titles, it would say Robert Montgomery and then whatever his rank was in the Navy. So they were telling you these Hollywood actors had been fighting for America, something that I don't think would happen very much today, right? There's not a lot of them who have been in Afghanistan and in Iraq. This was another thing that was bothering me. Oliver Stone made a lot of movies attacking the Vietnam War. Oliver Stone was a grunt in the Vietnam War, had the right to say anything he wanted to say, where these guys were sitting around in the Cafe Marmont on Sunset Boulevard and saying, oh, yes, I hate this George W. Bush. He's such a rube. I'll have another cafe latte, half cap. So I was watching this one about They Were Expendable when it came to me that if I wanted to write about these things, I basically had to go and have myself embedded with the troops. And I went over for a very brief period of time, was embedded with the troops in Afghanistan at Fort FOB, Kalagoosh, Forward Operating Base Kalagoosh, and which later became a central part of the action, but at the time was not very active, although I got there a day after they'd been fired upon. And then I wrote an article about that called 5 Days at the End of the World, talking about the fact that these movies were hurting our troops. And again, it was not the opinions, it was the fact that they were making propaganda for the enemy while our sons essentially were in harm's way. Now, one of the things that has happened in this period of time since all that is that my attitude toward war has changed. I have become more horrified by war. And my point about war was never that it was good. I never would have said that. It was that people are bad. People are bad, and they do bad things, and they don't like freedom, and they will attack you, and they will kill you, and some of them are poor and have nothing, and so they will come after the things that you have. And that the arguments against war don't make any sense. One of the most famous anti-war poems ever written is by Wilfred Owen. It's called Dulce et Decorum Est. It was written during World War I. And there were a lot of, for some reason, they were almost all gay. There were a lot of gay poets who came out of World War I and were very anti-war. And World War I was one of the most useless and brutal and bloody wars in history. Just one of the worst mistakes ever made. But Dulce et Decorum Est is just a description of a guy dying horribly from poison gas. And at the end, he says, I wish you could have seen this. He said, if in some smothering dream, if you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, which means sweet and fitting is it to die for one's country. And I've always felt that this is a dishonest poem. It's a beautiful poem. It's a beautifully written poem. But I felt it was a dishonest poem in the same way I felt about Oliver Stone's Born on the 4th of July with Tom Cruise, where the guy is ardent to go to war and then gets shot and paralyzed and then becomes an anti-war activist. Essentially, you're saying, oh, I got blown up, I got killed horribly, and therefore war is bad. But that's what makes people brave, is that they risk that. We understand that. We understand that war is awful, that we should avoid war at all costs, that we should never fight a war that doesn't absolutely have to be fought. But the courage is what you're facing. And nowadays is old. That's not just mechanized war, which is particularly bad, but that's as old as Homer's Iliad. Read Homer's Iliad and you will see the description of people being butchered is just awful. Now, many of you know me as the Lord of the Multiverse, so you would expect me to get a lot more respect than I do. The reason I don't is because I just don't go around bragging about being a Lord. But you should. That's what you should do. I should go around, and the way you do that is you go to established titles. Established titles is your opportunity to earn the title of Lord or Lady and get the respect you deserve. All you need is a 1 square foot plot of land in Scotland. Established Titles is a project based on a historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds or lords and ladies in English. In your title pack, you'll be bestowed with at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland, plus an official certificate with a crest. I have one. Your certificate features a unique plot number with which you can see the exact location of your land. Titles packs from Established Titles are a fun and unique gift for any occasion, and there are even couple packs that come with adjoining plots of land for the special someone in your life. With your certificate, you could officially add the prefix of Lord or Lady to your credit cards, plane tickets, and even your dating profiles. And get this, Established Titles told me that the first 200 people purchasing a title pack using my exclusive link will receive a plot within a few walking minutes of mine. Established Titles is actually running a massive sale right now. Plus, if you use the code Klavan, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/Klavan to get your gifts now and help support the channel. You can't be Lord of the Multiverse, but you can be Lord of a plot of ground in Scotland if you know how to spell Klavan. And by the way, it's Klavan. So I watched this Band of Brothers, which is it's terrific. I mean, it's the acting and the direction and the techniques for depicting battle, which Spielberg, who was once called the best second unit director who ever lived, which means that he's great and a great action director. The second unit guy is the guy who goes off and does the action scene while the real director's directing the actors and doing the drama and all that. And Spielberg has been called the best second unit director ever because his action sequences are so great. It's kind of a bitchy thing to say about him because it means that his ideas aren't that great. And I agree with that. I don't think his ideas are good at all. But anyway, it's got this wonderful cast of young guys, Damian Lewis, Donnie Wahlberg, Michael Fassbender, and they're just terrific. And it's the true story of these guys who parachute into Normandy, fought on D-Day, and then were in the famous Battle of the Bulge at Bastogne. They were called the battered bastards of Bastogne. And one of the things that struck me about this movie was that aside from the fact that the technology was so great that it really looked real, you could see what it was like to be in the battle, it was terrifying, it was very much like old war movies that I grew up watching. You know, I grew up watching them on TV. They were older than me. They were before I was born. They were made before I was born. But I grew up watching them on TV, and they make fun of them now for being patriotic and for being kind of gung-ho. The most famous of them is called The Sands of Iwo Jima with John Wayne. It's one of John Wayne's most famous, probably his most famous picture that he made where he wasn't a cowboy, and he plays Sergeant Stryker, who's the tough sergeant who's just everybody hates. All the soldiers hate him, but they don't realize that his toughness, his cruelty, his brutality in training them is getting them ready for an absolutely inhuman situation, which is the battle on Iwo Jima, where they finally raised the flag, and it was just a brutal, brutal battle, these island-to-island fights. And the scenes in Band of Brothers, which are real scenes, there is a true story, are almost exactly, they mirror the scenes that are in Sands of Iwo Jima, the tough training that turns out to be worthwhile, the tough leaders who don't let you do things, the fact that you have to do things that are inhuman. In Sands of Iwo Jima, one of the most difficult scenes to watch is a scene where one of the company gets shot and is dying and is calling for help, and John Wayne will not let his soldiers, I think he's a top sergeant, and he won't let his soldiers go out and rescue the man, because if he does, they'll all be killed. Here's a cut of that scene.
Stryker! Get down and stay down. You've had your orders, don't move.
There's somebody wounded out there.
Quiet.
Let's go over and get him.
Stay down. Maybe an old Jap trick. They pulled it plenty on the canal.
It doesn't sound like a Jap to me.
I don't care what it sounds like to you. You stick your head up and you'll tip our position.
Stryker! It's Bass. How many Japs know your name, Stryker? It's Bass. You know his voice.
Shut up.
Aren't you human at all? Don't you realize a friend of yours may be dying?
Knock it off.
This is what my father taught you. Be a great Marine. Be tough. Well, you can sit here and be tough if you wanna, but I'm going out there and get that guy. And the only way you can stop me is to kill me.
That's just what I'll do.
So you think, well, John Wayne is inhuman, but of course he's saving the life of his entire company by not letting this clown, this sensitive, nice, poetical clown, go save this guy and thereby expose their position and get them all killed. The exact same scene is in Band of Brothers when one of the guys gets wounded and they're trying to reach him and they're just pinned down and they have to retreat, and it's heartbreaking. This is cut 15.
Don't move! Stop moving! He's firing! Stop moving! Stop! What? Pull back! We gotta pull back! Let's get the hell out of here! Let's go! Let's go! Let's go! Move! Easy, go! Easy! Move! Come on! Stay with us! Stay with us! Hold on! Sterling! Stay with us! Look at me! Stay with us! Look at me! Hold on! Hold on! Run! Move! Don't move, Sterling! We're coming back! Let's go! Move! Take him out of here! Just hold on! Go! Let's go!
They leave him there and he dies. And one of the things, I mean, that got me about this, Saving Private Ryan too. I didn't like Saving Private Ryan. The first half hour of Saving Private Ryan is epoch-making. Spielberg, with his genius for filming action, changed the way that war scenes are filmed forever. Every war scene that comes before Saving Private Ryan looks dated because of Private Ryan. Every scene that comes after it copies Private Ryan because it was just so brilliant. The rest of the movie is sentimental, and it's as if this little wimpy guy suddenly realized, oh, sometimes you have to fight a war, you know? Sometimes you have to do this. Like he suddenly discovered it. And that also plays into Band of Brothers to a little degree. In a way, it's more sentimental than a John Wayne movie. There's one episode toward the end called Why We Fight, in which the soldiers stumble upon a prison camp, a Jewish concentration camp, and the episode is called Why We Fight, but that's not why we fought. We didn't fight to save the Jews. We didn't fight because the Nazis were gassing people, innocent people. That's not why we fought. We fought because of the geopolitical situation. It was the wisest thing to do. We stayed out of it as long as we could because people didn't want to go to war. They'd seen World War I and how useless that was. They didn't want to go back and fight for Europe. Europe was none of our business. A lot of the same feeling that a lot of people have about Ukraine. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying in World War II they were wrong, it turned out, because Hitler could not be stopped and he had to be stopped. And And so that's not why we fought. And the idea that it is why is just sentimental. But there's a part at the very end of that episode that really struck me. And this is the scene that really got me at the end of Why We Fight.
Hitler's dead.
Holy shit.
Shot himself in Berlin.
Is the war over, sir?
No. We have orders to Berchtesgaden, and we're gonna move out 1 hour.
Why? The man's not home. Should have killed himself 3 years ago. Saved us a lot of trouble.
Yeah, he should have. But he didn't.
And that's what struck me. That's why we fight. We fight because leaders do terrible, terrible things, and people elect leaders who do terrible, terrible things. And, you know, there's a famous story about Napoleon and Wellington at Waterloo when a sniper had Napoleon in his sights, and Wellington came up to him and says, "You can't do that. That's dishonorable to kill Napoleon." And I kind of thought like, oh, go ahead, kill Napoleon, put this to an end. You know, I really have come to the conclusion that before we send anybody, any soldier to war, we ought to be under threat. We should be under threat, and not under threat if this happens and then that happens and then this happens, because we don't know the future, but we should be under threat. These soldiers are so brave. The people who go into these places are so brave, and the injuries they can suffer are so horrific, and they're so young, and the amount of life lost is so terrible that all I can think at this point is that we should look at our leaders really, really carefully, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. And before we put Ukrainian flags on our houses, before we start to march in line and pound our fists and say, you know, and wave our flags, we should really, really question whether the United States of America has a dog in this fight, because war is genuinely hell. The old expression, war is hell, but men are brave, is correct. But before we save brave men to die in war, we should really make sure these leaders know what they're doing. I have to say, as I've gotten older, I have just begun to see how horrible it is. And I just think that testosterone burst that men have that makes them want to go and want to be in the fight and want to be heroic, this has got to be countered by older heads who don't believe in glory, who just believe that war must be fought when it must. We saw the horrible, horrible way the Biden administration pulled out of Afghanistan, disgusting, absolutely disrespectful of all those lives that were lost. Before we let that happen again, we ought to be very, very, very careful before we get our dander up and before we send men to war. If you're desperate for more Klavan-y goodness, and you so are, like and subscribe, and please remember to subscribe to the Andrew Klavan Podcast.